Hi, friend, and welcome here to the Human Longevity Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Peterson, and together we're about to explore the science and solutions that can allow you to live better, longer. Today, we're going to talk about the epigenetics of longevity. This is a field of modern science that is looking at how our DNA is expressed. We discovered many years ago when the human genome was mapped that genes are not our destiny. They are a blueprint. They are a recipe, a code of life that makes you, and me. However, 99% of that code is identical between all of us. So what really determines the difference? The answer? Epigenetics. It's all about how our genes are expressed, and most specifically, the information or the signal that's above the gene. That's the epigenome that sends that information in. It's going to tell that DNA what to do, and it's going to allow it to turn on or off, to open or close, and to make our code accessible to create every replication in the body to improve health, well-being, and even longevity. So this and so much more we're going to get into today as we dive into epigenetics and we begin to really understand why this matters. Because, hey, spoiler alert, 75 to 90% of what determines the signal above that gene that's talking to our DNA, our very code of life, is lifestyle driven. So that means you and I are in an incredible position to be really proactive, to do a few simple things really well that will slow down the rate and pace of biological aging. So we're going to dive into this. We're going to go ahead and put some strategies in place. And by the end, we're going to leave with the ways to continue to live better, longer. But before we get started, let's take a moment to thank today's sponsor. I'd like to thank Fullscript Dispensary. And today we're highlighting a very specific product offered by Thorne Nutraceuticals. Now, Thorne is one of the leaders in their research-backed clinical formulas. And specifically, we're going to recommend their MethylGuard. Now, you're going to learn about methylation on today's episode and why this is something that we all could use a little extra support with. Now, if you want to go ahead and get our listener 10% off, you can head over to humanlongevity.com/sponsors. There you'll scroll down, you'll see the picture, you'll see the listing for Thorne MethylGuard, and you'll be able to click and go over and order along with our other selected nutraceuticals that will truly keep your health in the most optimized state. So now let's dive into the show. Epigenetics. It is this beautiful communication, this crosstalk between the outer world and the inner world. And it is the scientific understanding of what signals, what information from our everyday lives is actually positively or negatively influencing our own genetic code. So now let's take a moment and again, remember that your DNA, it is like a recipe. It's proteins that come together in certain codes that will literally, when activated, when the signal comes in, kind of activates them to make a replica, to make a copy. So the DNA opens up. This is a process called acetylation. It helps to transcribe or replicate that code to then make the proteins and the amino acids that fold up and carry the message into the appropriate areas of the body to do the job, whatever the key job is, to make more tissues, to repair, all of it. Well, once that code has been replicated, then it methylates. It needs to close back down. So this process of acetylation opening and methylation closing is critical to protecting as well as accessing our DNA. So an interesting thing that begins to occur, as I just shared, the research shows that about 75 to 90% of what informs our epigenetic signals that literally talk to our DNA comes by way of our lifestyle, our environment. What does this mean? It means that what we are exposing ourselves to, the foods we're eating, the water we're drinking, the air we're breathing, the thoughts we're thinking, the emotions that are running through, all of this elicits. Our psychology is talking to our physiology and vice versa, but everything is coming in. And our system has to interpret it because the number one job of our body is to keep us safe and to keep us alive for as long as possible, as well as possible. And so what's happening is this beautiful human system is this intricate dynamic of constantly assessing the outer world. Is the outer world friendly or is it a foe? Is there a threat that we've got to detect? Do we need to close down, methylate, protect, and close off? Or is it safe for thriving? Can we grow forward? Now, what's interesting is there has to be a way from a hereditary standpoint to keep the species safe and alive and propagating, right? Generation after generation. Changes to our genetic code, well, those are like the hardware. It takes a long time for something to happen. And literally in the last 100,000 years plus, there's been very few shifts to our primal code. However, there are changes in the phenotypic expression, how that code is read. And what determines this is, again, these methylation marks. So methylation is going to close off and protect, if you will, certain parts of our code. Now, this is good until it's not. In modern day society, we have a lot of disruption that's creating more and more methylation, over-methylation, or impairing our ability to properly methylate. And this is important because when we look through the lens of longevity, and again, we're talking epigenetics of longevity, what's available to us to slow down, stop, and or even reverse the rate and pace of biological aging. This is, again, really the study that all the scientists have been looking at for over 20 plus years. And it was really back in 2013 that, the top minds from the top universities, everybody was trying to be the Nobel laureate and find the one thing. What's the fountain of youth? What's the one pill, lotion, potion, treatment that can reverse age, that can keep us young forever and ever, right? And there really isn't one thing. Not yet. Who's to say it may not happen? But as we understand this beautiful human body, we are a complex system of trillions of cells. So again, if we understand the cell and we understand what causes it to express youth and vitality and optimal function versus dysfunction, breakdown, disease, then there should be the key, right? That's the answer. That's the path. The more we know about the cell and cellular medicine, cellular health, cellular function, that's what's literally birthed the longevity industry. That's what when you hear about these molecules, when you hear about therapies, when you hear about treatments, every company is looking for a way to signal these cells in such a manner that it can slow down this rate and pace of biological aging. Well, it got really interesting because this was all kind of in 2013. They brought all these cellular signatures together and said, hey, we've got these 9 hallmarks of aging. We have figured it out. Here's why we age and why we really don't have to. If we can just manipulate these certain 9 components, we can begin to really slow down the effects. Okay, great. Well, Dr. David Sinclair out of Harvard went even one step further. And he said, if we kind of pull back and we look at this picture, these 9 hallmarks of aging all have kind of one root unique expression, and that is inflammation. In fact, if we go back even further and we look at all of the modern diseases that we are treating, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, autoimmunity, we're looking at these big problems that are leading people to the doctor every day, and we look at their common expression. It's also inflammation, okay? This kind of signature overall expression. And he got to saying, wait, is the disease the problem or is the disease a symptom? Is the real problem this aging process, this inflammaging? So what inflammation is in our system, in a real easy way to think about it, it's like chaos. It's noise. It starts to interfere with proper signaling and communication. Again, back to epigenetics. Epigenetics is really just about the passing of these signals, of the information, of bringing the information and interpreting it from the outer world to the inner world so that our DNA knows what to do, when to do, how to do it, and why, so it does it properly. And the better that we can signal our DNA, the better it can respond and repair and regenerate and replicate, well, the better we live longer. Okay, makes a lot of common sense, right? So he said, well, hey, if we've got all this inflammation, and this inflammation is like chaos, and what this inflammation does is it starts to interfere with methylation. It starts to increase the amount of these methylation marks. Now, simultaneously, we had the great minds of like Stephen Hovarth and Dr. Levy looking at biological aging. And we talked a lot about this in the very first podcast episode here on the show, and looking to say, hey, we have these epigenetic clocks and we can measure how fast our tissue is aging. How do we do it? Through methylation marks. So again, these marks that are being put on the DNA tell us a lot about the levels of stress to the system, of inflammation, of chaos, of noise, of how the system is perceiving threat or challenge. Now, to you and I, if we want to slow down the rate and pace of aging, if we want to look better, feel better, live better, longer, then we get to say, well, what are the things that create this inflammation? What are the things that create this chaos and this noise and dysregulate methylation? Because if we know that, then we can take steps to improve it, right? Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. This is when we make the crossover in the show from talking about the context and the science and really kind of what this means into the application. This is, I've given you some information, but now let's understand how we can apply and implement this into our everyday life. So when I say the word lifestyle, that can be big, right? Again, foods we're eating, thoughts we're thinking, relationships we're in, environments that we're living in, quality of air. It's a lot, and it can feel like too much to tackle. Where do I start? Melissa, I just want to slow down the rate of aging. I just want to improve my health so I can, I can feel great every day, as many days as possible. Okay, so let me go back and let's just get to a common ground that is accessible. And it is this idea of stress. Now, we talked a lot about stress in last week's episode. And here's what I'll remind you of. There's good stress. So stress is neutral, but it's how our bodies interpret it, right? So how we perceive it psychologically tells our body like, oh, I think this is good or not good. Good is eustress, right? That literally lowers the hormones of stress, cortisol, raises testosterone, raises oxytocin, increases our ability to perform and be in focused flow. That's the good stuff. That's when we're excited, anticipatory, eager, curious, open. There's the distress, which feels bad, feels worrisome, overloading. I'm not excited about that. Feels like a lot of pressure. Okay. So demands come into the system, physical, mental, emotional, chemical, and environmental. They come in different forms. They come into the system every day that we're alive. And our system is designed to handle it. That's how we literally grow and thrive forward. If we're given the time to recognize, respond, come back to rest, to recover. The rest and recovery is really important. Typically, as we go through life, we start to put more and more demands on the system. Now, here's the deal. We have these things that are big and small. The slow drip over time. Anytime our system, our brain perceives a threat, real or imagined, an email from somebody you didn't like. Ooh, that's a saber-toothed tiger. Car accident nearly averted. Ooh, modern day saber-toothed tiger, right? There's real, like almost hitting a car. And there's imagine like, oh, this message from this person. Our system feels the same rush of adrenaline and cortisol. We've got to fight or flight. We've got to literally release the cortisol to flood the system with glucose because that's the fuel for our muscles that allows us to take action. Okay, so here's the deal. The more demands on the system, the more we activate this cortisol response. The more cortisol, the more inflammation, the more glucose, the higher levels of insulin, the more noise in the system, because often we're not engaging. We're just sitting and stewing and ruminating. So the stress builds up. These signals get crossed and our bodies become less efficient. We have more marks put down through the methylation because the system has got to have a way to get from mother to offspring these really important notes of, hey, this is an inhospitable environment. There's a lot of danger and I need you to know about this so that you can be safe in the next generation. You can watch out for this. You can be aware. So think of methylation more like pencil marks. Here's what's really cool. These marks can be erased. What we have found through biological age testing is that when we measure these marks and then we go apply these lifestyle interventions, we can actually retest and we can see those marks remove. We can see the fact that we are aging in reverse, that things are working. We are youthing and vitalizing. David Sinclair's group said, okay, wait, if we think of our DNA like data compressed on a CD, that's the pure code. It's got all the right instructions in our most vital and youthful way. And then life happens and we start to methylate and there's inflammation and we start to have this chaos and this noise. Let's think of those like scratches on the disc. And when that disc is scratched, we can't get to the information the same way anymore, can we? And so that's the act of methylation, closing parts of our DNA off. And if we're literally closing off parts of our code, we're closing off our own human potential, right? To really be at our best, physically, mentally, on all levels. And so his lab said, well, what if we could smooth over those scratches? What if we could get back to that code? Could we literally have a way to signal the cell and reverse, like not just slow down biological aging, but literally to kind of hop back in time, to go back to a time before those scratches when the cell, when the information was in its pristine form? And the answer is yes. Yes, they have proven this. They are doing incredible breakthroughs. They have reversed blindness in mice. They're in human trials. They are going to be bringing out some incredible technologies that's all about cellular reprogramming. We're going to use very specific signals and molecules and vectors to come in and basically kind of clear away those marks so we can get right back to that pure code. Now, while all this is in the research lab and going through studies, and there's exciting things coming in the near future of longevity, right now, today, you can begin to do different simple actions that will start to erase some of those methylation marks. So if we know that this inflammation, one of the main culprits, is kind of too many demands on the system, well, I'm going to encourage you to go back to last week's episode, listen to Living Longer with Stress, learn a little bit more about that. But for today, I just want you to realize that hormone cortisol is a powerful driver of this aging acceleration in our system. So when we can begin to lower cortisol, regulate cortisol, bring balance into our nervous system between our fight or flight and our rest and digest, and we do that by way of the vagus nerve. When we begin to do this, then we start to lower that rate and pace of aging. So here's a few ways that we can do it. So step one, going back to last week's conversation, we can regulate our nervous system to lower those stress hormones by kind of pumping the brakes when we are in distress. And how do you know? You feel overloaded, your heart rate's increasing, your blood pressure's increasing, you feel tight, you feel tense, you just feel like you're going to pop and it just doesn't feel good. That's a sign from your life, from your body, that there's just too much happening right now. And that doesn't mean that you're not capable and competent. It's just a sign to say, hey, we're in overdrive. Our foot's been on the gas too long. We need to pump the brake. We need to give a little ease to the system because remember, stress is good, but we need to rest and recover. We need some recovery moments so that we can actually get even stronger and we can even take on more. We can become even more capable than we already are. So when you're feeling, you're noticing heart is racing, blood is pumping, tension is rising, and you're just feeling really drained and depleted and overloaded, pump the brakes. How do we do that quickly? How do we start to regulate that cortisol in a really effective way? We can use our vagus nerve. We can hum. That's going to help to release more nitric oxide. It's going to help to increase endothelial lining. It's going to improve circulation, going to bring more oxygen in, so more energy into the system. It's going to help to lower cortisol, move us into parasympathetic when we're humming. It's going to pump the brakes. When we slow down our rate and pace of breathing, it's going to pump the brakes. So those are little micro moments that help to regulate our system. Now, there's many other ways. Go back and listen to that episode if you want to hear more. Another way I want you to think about this is what we know is saying, okay, our cortisol, that hormone that's really pro-inflammatory when it's chronically under production, if you will, right? Like a lot of life demands. What we know is it's tied to the natural circadian rhythm, that natural light-dark cycle. So simply by beginning to attune ourselves with the light-dark cycle, getting up with the sun, going to bed as the sun goes to bed, okay, we start to entrain and more normalize our cortisol function. A great way to do this is get early morning sunlight into your eyes, about 10 minutes. Again, within those first, ideally 2 hours of waking, as close to waking as possible. You can go out and walk the dog, have your tea, do some breathing, some meditation, some intention setting. Same thing at the end of the day. As sun is setting, go get 10 minutes at the end of the day. The light is a very powerful signal to your hormones, and it can immediately help your system to regulate. Next thing is to get up and engage your muscles. So if cortisol is the hormone to activate fight, flight, or freeze, we want to use the glucose that is being put into the system. And the fastest way to kind of sop up that glucose is to build muscle. Our muscles utilize it, they metabolize it when we're literally just sitting and relaxing. And one of the best ways you can support longevity is to increase your lean muscle mass. We start to naturally decrease about 1% every year from our 30s on of our lean muscle mass. And this correlates with a condition called sarcopenia. And as we chronologically get older, the less muscle we have, the less mobile we become, the less independent we become. We suffer from being able to do just acts of daily living, picking things up, getting out of a chair, opening and closing doors and jars. And so we need our muscles so that we can move with strength and vitality. And so right here, right now, it's going to help to lower cortisol. It's going to help to allow you to be more metabolically active. And the best way to do it is just engage those muscles with some resistance work 2 to 3 times a week for about 20 to 30 minutes. This means just go pick some things up. You can start with resistance bands. You can start with what's called isometric contractions, which is literally sitting in your chair and just squeeze those muscles, release. You can get even more engaged by literally going to the gym or going out and doing yard work and lifting heavy things with increased weight, right? Putting more of a physical resistance demand on your muscles. This helps to build those muscles to become more metabolically active over time. And the last thing I want to share with you today is this concept around methylation. Now, I shared with you that today's sponsor is our full script dispensary. And we are highlighting the Thorne nutraceutical of their Methyl Guard. And the reason being is that this process of methylation, it's essential. To methylate isn't bad. It's necessary. It's good. It happens every moment. Like we need it to occur. Well, some of us over-methylate, some of us under-methylate. And again, it's a bit of it is kind of what has happened within our code. And yet here's the deal. To properly methylate, we need folate. Folate is found in many beautiful green leafy veggies and food. There's so many folate-rich foods that you can simply get it by increasing your consumption of those types of food. If you have a busy lifestyle and you find yourselves deferring to a lot of things that are in boxes, bags, and cans and drive-throughs, then the likelihood that you're getting folic acid that's been added back in is a form of that vitamin, a precursor to folate, that is not in its most natural form. And in processed foods, they strip it from its natural form. They add things back in. And what they do is they typically don't add back in the enzymes that are essential to break this stuff down and make it available to the body. And what this means is about 65% of the population has issues with methylation. So we have some impairments. And when things are in folic acid form, we don't break it down properly. It takes longer. And it starts to kind of have a backup and an impairment, and it can actually become even more pro-inflammatory to the system. Again, accelerating that rate and pace of aging. So what does this all mean? Well, we want to eat more folate-rich foods. Our foods that we eat, the molecules that we bring in, whether by supplementation or again, by natural foods, they signal our cells. They signal our health to either speed up or slow down that rate and pace of aging. So you may or may not know there's ways to test this easily to see if you might have any type of when I say impairment, like you just might have a slower pathway. It doesn't mean that it's broken, it doesn't work. It just means you might need some extra support. Okay. And so if you already know that you've got a lot of life demands, if you feel more overloaded more often, or you feel like you're experiencing more aches and pains, visible signs of chronological aging, you're feeling more fatigued than you are energized, these are just subtle signs that your body would really like some extra support. It would like to reduce some of the overload and overwhelm. It would like to invite more in of what uplifts and energizes it. And sometimes we need to just bring in some of those support tools by way of natural sunlight exposure, natural movement, just getting some time to do what the body was designed to do. You don't have to overthink it. The body will kind of speak to you and guide you if you're just willing to tune in, appreciate, and listen a little bit, and then just kind of go, okay, well, let me give it a try. You got nothing to lose. And if you need some additional support, and it feels easier just to say, hey, I want to go ahead and bring in some of this, then there's great research that shows how that effective a good methylfolate and B12 combination can be in really supporting those pathways. So now, my friends, we've talked about the epigenetics of longevity to realize that how we live, the environments we live in, the demands to our system, physically, mentally, emotionally, chemically, environmentally, they do stack up over a lifetime. And depending on the quality of those signals in determines the quality of the response out. So we've all heard garbage in, garbage out, right? So if we improve the signal, we clean the clutter, we start to just give our bodies more of what feels good to it. We start to lessen some of the demands. We don't have to overthink this. We can just start to create a little bit more space, a little bit more ease, which means the body doesn't have to work as hard. It has less things that it's seeing and interpreting as threats to the system. So the system becomes more efficient, more effective. We're working smarter versus harder. There's more energy to go back into healing, repairing, properly replicating that DNA, right? And so the net gain and benefit for you and I is we are literally slowing down the effects of biological aging. So we are youthing at a cellular level, regardless of how many candles are on the birthday cake for our chronological years. So now, my friend, as always, it is your turn. I want to invite you, if you need a little help, go over to humanlongevity.com/sponsors. On that page, you're going to find some of my favorites. So, of course, we talked last week about Brain Tap. That's always a great way to help to regulate your nervous system, respond to those demands of life. We have highlighted this week Full Script Dispensary and Thorne's Methyl Guard. So those are just a few ways to support yourself, get discounts, get free access to some of those goodies over there at humanlongevity.com/sponsors. So let's not just talk about it. Let's go be about it. Remember, information without implementation means nothing. So this is my official invitation from me to you to go implement. Try a few of these things on for size. Just be curious, be kind to yourself, notice what you notice. You're not going to get it wrong. You can only get it right if you really begin to get curious and to be eager and open to what is possible in you, truly living your longest, healthiest life at every age and every stage, starting today. I'm Dr. Melissa Peterson. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and share this with others. Thank you for being a part of the community and helping us grow. Continue to be well.